Hello, hello, hello. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you are joining us, and welcome one and all to, well, the final teissTalk of the year. Can you believe it? So obviously it's time to get the Christmas attire out. No jumper this time because, as any of you long-time listeners and watchers will remember, I always tend to choose one with lots of green in it, and then you can see through me. So we're avoiding that this year. Just trying to stay festive whilst also office smart. We've got a great show coming up for you today with three fantastic guests, including an excellent sponsor who we thank for our tea and biscuits as usual. Do not forget, however, that if you ask us a decent question, or even in certain circumstances, any question that we find funny, difficult to answer, challenging, or just generally we kind of like the look of your and cut of your jib, then you could win a teissTalk mug, which I don't have with me today, unfortunately, but you all know what it is and what it looks like. We haven't awarded one for 2 weeks, which is extremely disappointing. So if we do get a torrent as a special Christmas gift, we might be doing 2 mugs this week. Who knows? Let's see. So without further ado, let's crack on, shall we? Can I ask onto the stage Richard, Thom, and Michael? Hello, Richard.
Hi, Tom.
Hello, Thom.
Tom, good afternoon. Good afternoon.
This could be confusing. Hello, Michael.
Hey there, how we doing?
Very good. And Michael, thank you very much for being our sponsor. As I said, we thank you for our tea and biscuits or our coffee and cookies, whichever one whichever side of the pond you're watching us from today. So let's move straight on, shall we, to our news item, which again comes from The Guardian, same as last time. UK underestimates the threat of cyber attacks from hostile states and gangs, says security chief. So my question here is, who in the UK is underestimating it? Because if it is the folks like GCHQ and NCSC, I want my tax money back. And if it's not them, then surely who else is Are we as businesses underestimating this? I'd be quite surprised given the environment we currently find ourselves in, a little bit of unrest. You'd think we would be on our best behaviour.
Yeah. I wonder if people are getting a bit blasé about it these days. There's just, there's so much news, there's so many attacks coming through. It's just, it's happening to someone else. It happens all the time. This is BAU now, right?
That does seem to be an element of it, in a sense that we're victims of our own success.
Well, victims of someone.
Well, as in, it's become a topic that is worthy of news, whereas before it was just, it didn't even make the front line, the front
question,
page.
yeah, it's worthy of news, but do people know how to stop it? Is probably the question that the businesses face.
I think also we're facing so many real challenges, genuinely wicked problems facing us. When you look at the geopolitical situation, all of those challenges globally, which are now starting to manifest domestically. And I think something has genuinely shifted. And so previously, when you were dealing with cyber criminal gangs and hacktivists, and there may be some state-aligned groups. Now I think I think there has been a shifting as we're in this sort of tripolar struggle, and things that were further afield and were big government are now, I think, starting to hit businesses and individuals in a way that they didn't before. And so I think there's a sense of that realization that the world has changed and we've got to keep pace, because we don't control some of those events, far from it. And so I think there's a concern over that widening gap that is fundamentally different from, I'd say, this time sort of 2 or 3 years ago.
Interesting.
I also think we have to not forget that not every victim is large enterprise or government. we're so interconnected now across organizations of many different sizes and types. And the weakest link in the chain is just the way in. And a lot of those weak links in the chain don't have dedicated security processes or let alone officers today to oversee the problem and make it a company priority to address. And I think that's probably where a lot of the underestimation comes into here, is that there's just a big portion of the population that just is blind to the problem.
And
So there's
if you take scale as well, go back, what is it, Moore's or Nevin's law, if you look at the amount of endpoints, the explosion of IoT, connectivity, etc., the threat surface, which is a term we use as professionals, but others don't necessarily recognize it. But, the amount of data points, endpoints that are out there that can potentially be exploited that are unprotected, that's a real concern. And that again, absolutely agree with you. That is something that affects us across society.
So what's the tipping point been? Obviously, we don't wish to get overly political here, but we can't ignore the fact that there is a war going on in the east, between Ukraine and Russia. Various countries are jumping in on both sides. The cyber aspect means that you don't have to go kinetic, for want of a better term, to attack these people who are helping out your enemy. So is it just simply the fact that there is a ground war going on, or has there something else happened here?
I'd say it feels larger than that. Nothing happens in a vacuum, and the ground war started. That doesn't just start from its own or on its own, right? So there's all kind of political division going on, but that's caused by social division. So the politics from within a country drive their foreign politics, etc. So there's so much kind of social division going on, economic division on the side of that, and that all kind of spawns different threats. But at the big macro scale, I think obviously leads to these blocks kind of. The big blocks aren't necessarily kinetically fighting each other, but they're looking for ways to destabilize and disrupt their perceived rivals, right? So cyber is a perfect kind of asymmetric way of doing that. You can hide behind, no one's going to be found accountable for it. Without kind of pushing things to the extent of actually launching an all-out war, which still isn't in everyone's best interest, luckily. It's.
Yeah, I think there is. I think I, absolutely sort of echo and amplify that contest that's ongoing. And I think when you talk about cyber, and you can talk about attacks on, different industrial control systems, etc., in some respects, the contest is more manifestly sort of effective when they are targeting populations. You've got, misdis, malinformation. You've got the year of defending democracy and how you were able to change people's opinions or sections of those opinions. So when we talk about cyber, I think we should probably expand this and talk more in the digital and information domains, because there is a contest ongoing, and there is a contest for, through information for influence, as well as then the harder edged attacks that we do see on, energy systems or water systems.
I was going to say, when it comes to actually fighting a war, I think after we saw Russia invade Ukraine, we saw fewer cyber attacks than you might expect, or that worried about in the actual theatre, because it turns out just bombing stuff is more effective at causing damage. So it's more effective when you're not actually fighting each other. You're just trying to undermine systems in advance, potentially. And I think that's a lot of what we're seeing at the moment. The APTs that the likes of the NCSC are worried about. It's more about probing, right? It's kind of like trying to understand what's going on.
It's the precursor.
Yeah, of course. The issue now is all the the critical national infrastructure, etc., isn't run by necessarily a state anymore. There's lots of big companies involved, getting states versus companies. So it's all this kind of like asymmetric warfare almost that's going on.
And Thom started to touch on really motivations. And I think we also have to keep in mind here, everything's not about disruption and an attacker taking out the enemy. The attacker might have financial motivations. We've seen a lot of North Korean cyber attacks recently, just going after cryptocurrency so that they can fund whatever programs they have internally that are important to them. So I think the fact there's just so many actors out there with different motivations just make this even more complex to figure out how to defend against.
I want to pick up on an earlier point of yours, Michael, before we move on as well, about the supply chain, because I think, I think what we've been talking about, the socio-political areas, I think is a massive influence on this, obviously. But I think supply chain is an interesting one, because I think you're right in that a lot of people really underestimate the supply chain problem. And we did a talk on this. We did a teissTalk on this earlier this year. Must have been about 4 or 5 months ago, maybe. And in some of the research, I found that one of the high street supermarkets, the Tesco's, the Sainsbury's, one of the product managers said that the supply chain for a meat lasagna, a frozen meat lasagna, is over 100 different companies. And when you put it in that context, I think it's far larger than people have ever imagined. And perhaps one of these points is that actually we're just starting to understand really how big it is. And if one of those 100 suppliers gets popped, not only could it disrupt the supply chain, it could actually infect that supply chain.
One of the things that we're all familiar with is the security training that every employee typically has to go through in a company. And we've all been trained on certain types of information controls that we are responsible for in our day-to-day roles. I don't think supply chain responsibility has been pushed down to every employee yet, but it probably should be, because that's where you actually start to appreciate how every department and every piece of the business has its own little supply chain that's important to monitor. One of the things that I often have to remind clients of is the fact that your software programs that you use internally is a supply chain in effect. And as you're allowing software in, as you're implementing auto update policies to kind of manage the auto patching, you might be pulling through a malicious piece of code as you implement that update. It's something that we saw in the Mac world just within the last year, where a software telephone actually had some bad code that got broadly distributed to over 1 million endpoints in a split second. And I think that when you start to make it everyone's responsibility to manage supply chain security, that's where I think we'll start to get better hands around it. But right now, I think we're looking at a very narrow slice of supply chain across most businesses.
Yeah, and I very, very much recognise those statements. I mean, that the security education and training, that'll be great at helping you to do some of those basic hygiene things, but actually you need to get into the business processes. You need to be understanding what you've got to have in your contracts, those non-functional requirements, the C&P, how you track those. That's where you'll start to make a tangible difference. And then actually the thing that's really difficult to do, I mean, visibility when you go below that first tier is always a challenge. And then trying to have any form of assurance. Yeah, there are great frameworks and mechanisms that you can use. Actually putting those into practice that's remarkably difficult.
I can say for me, it might go off at a bit of a tangent, but it feels like getting a culture right and kind of making security just part of everyone's BAU doesn't solve everything, but it goes such a long way to addressing so many of the issues we're talking about, right? If you supply chain, everyone in every bit of supply chain just thought before they clicked, or just thought, does this look too good to be true? It kind of is, it helps a lot just with that supply chain issue. The same for, the APTs, but most of the threats will involve duping or making someone, or someone just making an accident at some point. So having that kind of culture, kind of working from the bottom up, to get kind of everyone throughout an organization to understand, what the threats are.
And I'm sorry, go on.
And that really chimes, because if you look at safety, actually safety does, there's normally a golden thread of safety that runs through an organization, because they really do understand it. And that, we try to weave together safety and security, I think we're now trying to look at how you weave that alongside ethics and sustainability. Because again, they're all, really important, critically important, I think, to our businesses. But security, I think we've got a bit of a way to go. But there are other people who've had to tread this path, so I think we can and should, engage and learn from them.
Now we've moved squarely into the panel proper as such, talking about supply chain, etc. I'm going to pick up on that culture thing. I think culture has been and security culture, I think, has been a little bit of a how can I put it? It's a really difficult thing to attain. It's always been put up there as you must have a security culture, tone at the top, I think ISC squared calls it. You have to have this culture of security, etc. Everybody talks about it. Hardly anybody I know does it. It's probably single-digit percents of companies have a really strong security culture. Do you think next year culture is something that we will be talking about, or will there be just too much AI, too much supply chain, too much, nation state hacking and ransomware?
I certainly hope so. Sorry, Michael. I was just going to say, yes. What's the phrase? Culture eats strategy for breakfast. I'm
Yes,
not sure if
yes.
it was actually someone actually said it, but,
Peter Thiel, Peter someone.
Yeah, but if this is it, if you don't get the culture right, how do you address everything else, including AI? There's all the we can get into talking about AI, all the risks around it, especially using your own systems. A lot of it just comes from people not understanding how it works and what the threats are.
Yeah.
And again, having a security culture that helps people understand those threats and act. Is required. So yeah, I certainly hope we talk about it more, because talking about it might raise awareness, which is the first step to actually.
Yeah. I mean, in some respects, I agree, but I'll challenge, I suppose, because where I'd like to what I'd like to talk about is the organisation, the business culture, because that's the thing that sets the tone across all of the different pillars.
Yep.
When you talk about security culture, suddenly it's just the chief security officer's problem. But actually, I think it's bigger than that. And I think it does start at the top. And I think, that's why if you link security and safety and sustainability and ethics, how does the business operate? Because if the business outcomes, are such that it is willing to not take security seriously, no matter what you do, a chief security officer will just not be able to achieve at the end state. So I think it's the business culture that's really important. And I think that sets it. So yeah, start from the top. And then you can build something that's security processes, frameworks that support the business's culture, its values, its standards.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. As long as sorry, Michael, I dipped in last time. You go.
I was going to say, one of the things that I've seen, I'd be keen to hear how this resonates with you, is a big problem that we've had to this point is that many organizations talk about cyber in a negative way. You look at the product organizations that have bugs that are being tracked. You look at individuals that fall victim to phishing, and there's a culture of shame almost, where all we focus on is the negative. We don't celebrate the sharing. And I feel like if there was a change in tone, we might actually educate individuals and pull everybody into the conversation, as opposed to making it almost a taboo topic that people don't want to be talked to. They don't want to be associated with the cyber discussion, because right now it's viewed as a very negative thing on them as an individual. And I think that part needs to shift if we expect everybody to participate in the dialogue.
Yeah, I think it goes back to what Thom was saying there. It's got to come from the top as well. It's that how do you build that into the business strategy? As long as security is just the security team's problem and CISO's problem, then we're not going to change much, right? Because like you say, no one wants to see the CISO, right? Or the
well, it normally means something's gone wrong.
Time that you're in trouble or something's gone wrong.
Yeah, exactly.
How do we change that position where the CISO starts becoming a value add, or someone who says, look, this is how we're supporting the business, this is how we're adding value to what the business does, we're supporting the strategy. So I definitely want to see more of that.
Yeah, it's funny you say that about nobody wants to see the CISO. It's talking about the mental health of CISOs or security professionals, etc. I always say that CISOs deal with secrets and get measured on failure, and that is a really toxic combination, right? But let's look forward positively to 2025 and talk about again. I just want to sort of round off this culture thing. The point that's been made about it needs to be an all-round company culture, I think, is absolutely obviously the right way to go. The challenge is getting into that culture. Often the company culture is a very protected thing. It's protected by brand management, marketing, by certain executives. To actually get into and have a seat at that culture table, for want of a better term, is very difficult, because it's always focused on customer success and excellence. And we have a culture of feedback, and all those sorts of, all very valid and all very important. You want to add another 3 things to our culture list, forget it.
Well, I'd be interested to hear, I guess, and I won't necessarily get it here, but interested to hear from organizations that have gone through big incidents, suffered, the consequences of a major cyber attack. Do they have those conversations, or do they have that access a bit more readily granted? Because now the business understands the consequences. I got a feeling, probably yes, anecdotally from a few people I've spoken to, it takes a good incident to get to that point, or at least to start.
I mean, I think you never let a crisis go to waste. And I think if you've had, I think it was a CISO from, I think it was one of the big construction companies who had a ransomware attack, and he goes, it was an extinction level event almost. And subsequent to that, the organization did change. But equally, I think there is the ability of security to obscure through language, and so there are complex issues, but you've got to be able to talk about them simply, and you've got to be able to talk with business leaders in a term that they will understand, and you've also got to demonstrate how you can add value to those outcomes that they seek to achieve. And so I think there is more of the security capability and functions understanding the business and going, actually, here's where I can help you. And I think if you're able to have a conversation in language that's about aid and assistance, you can potentially make those incremental changes without having had to go through those huge organizational shifts if you've been breached badly.
Yeah, those who have experienced the battle scars and have kind of had to sit through a day or several weeks of an outage, they don't want to go back there. And Thom, to your point, boards talk about operational excellence today. Cyber can absolutely be part of that. And I think making sure that cyber is showing the value that's adding to those already kind of prioritized company level objectives, I think that's the path forward. It's not adding 3 new things that are cyber oriented. It's showing that the value that I think security, resilience, and all the other great things that go along with the function that they add to the business is where the secret's going to come from.
Is it because we as security leaders, the greater we here, obviously not us, we're excellent, but we as security leaders, we tend to think of security as that extra special silo that has to have special treatment for the company, when actually it's just one of many segments of the business coming together. And so we find it very difficult to, understand the business and the drivers and the levers that can be pulled, and just expect security because it's security and therefore we have to do it. So is it a fundamental misunderstanding of how our business works?
I'm not sure I'd go so far as fundamental misunderstanding, but I think it's reasonable. The people who work in security expect to be passionate about security and want to do it well. Exactly the same for everyone in every department. But yeah, it's operating in silos you need to get out of. I think the one thing that made me realize this was doing some work a few years ago on information security and M&A. Just hadn't been, so we go through M&A, and you realize at that point, InfoSec, when it comes to a merger or an acquisition, a lot of the time is just miles down the priority list, and it kind of brings home this idea. Sometimes it's going to be really important. Sometimes they don't, the business might not particularly care if the whole acquisition fails because it's been pushed through to make sure a competitor doesn't get a hold of this.
Yeah, the tactical or a
strategic.
So
at that point, your concerns are not going to register. So it's being able to understand that business, the drivers behind it, what's going on, and understanding your place in the pecking order, almost from a security point of view, means you can have the conversations and start shouting about security when it really matters, not when it doesn't, or it matters to you, but in the grand scheme of things, it's about 10th on the risk list.
It's contextual, isn't it? That's the key thing.
Yes. So absolutely, to your point, it's about understanding, what are the business strategies and how do we support that, and how do we, politically, I guess, internally navigate those conversations and start bringing up the security agenda at the best possible time.
I think there's another aspect to it as well, is that not everything has to be up at that C-suite and sort of board level and filtering down. Actually, I do fundamentally agree. You've got to understand the business, and I think you've got to go hunting. You've got to go and go across the different divisions and areas of the business and go, okay, where is there an opportunity for us collaboratively to work on something? And so I think there should be quite a lot of bottom up. Get out there, speak to people, understand and walk in their shoes, for a bit, so that you can just start to solve problems, but more importantly, build a network. And I really think that sort of building that network, security then becomes something that, it starts small, and then starts to grow. And then before you know it, people are talking about you. And then that will then get up to the board. So trying to go in top down, you've got to do that. But equally, I think you've got to marry that with a bottom-up approach and just making those small incremental improvements.
Now we did go down a little rabbit hole there, just to bring it back to the core point here about next year's threat landscape. We've had a tumultuous 4 years, let me put it that way, since the beginning of 2021, in the way that working patterns have changed. Before then, in the couple of years before that, we were talking about the hybrid worker, etc., and people being flexible working, and the perimeter no longer existing. We don't have the four walls around us anymore, etc. That was really pushed to the limits for 2020 and 2021, etc. We're now at a stage where we're bringing people back to offices, but also expecting them to be flexible, smaller offices, fewer desks, you work from home, you come to the office, you do everything in between. Is this now a newly unique situation for us? Is this a new way that people can be taken advantage of by the threat actors because of this, remote onboarding and then coming to an office, etc.? Or is this just actually we've worked it out now? We've done both. We've done in the office, we've done remote, and we've done hybrid. Now we know everything.
I think everything you're alluding to there is kind of the result of digital transformation, right? So many businesses started to go through the journey just before the pandemic. They saw the benefits of starting down that path, and now we've kind of reached a point where we have a whole bunch of new devices and new ways of working that are enabling people to just have explosive levels of productivity, which is great. But all the new things that came in many ways, I think, bypass the security checks and the protections that we might have put on them if they had come in at a slightly slower pace and maybe into the physical office, as opposed to just going straight to people's homes where they could unbox themselves. And so the big kind of wake-up call for me just in the past 12 months is how 2024 was really the year of mercenary spyware. Every organization I go into is now talking about the impact of spyware on mobile, which I think is helping people to wake up to the fact that a lot of these devices crept in and they don't even run antivirus software, let alone have a complete security program built around them. And so, as we look to the year ahead, I'd expect to see, from an attack perspective, more focus on these air quotes modern platforms, your iPhones, your iPads, maybe your Vision Pros if your business is bringing those in, because these things are handling intellectual property. They've got sensitive data on them that it's low-hanging fruit for attackers if you don't have any tools on them there to protect them. But I think on the flip side, on the positive side, that's where I'm seeing a lot of businesses now spin up programs, is actually put some emphasis on telemetry collection, putting a focus on at least protecting the executives that are carrying mobile devices around that might have some sensitive intel on there. So I think that there's a negative year ahead, but also I think some signs of light that I'm optimistic about.
And I think that the digital transformation, I think that basically mirrors and supports also a societal transformation in its approach to how it seeks to live and thrive in society. I mean, before we came on, when I said to you, I haven't watched terrestrial TV for however many years, you go to whichever platform, any multi-generational, multi-occupancy household now, you will see people in a combined social setting on different forms of tablets, platform, phone, etc. So society is just, evolving in a different way. And I think business and society overlapped in those strange COVID years. I do agree with Michael. I think business and government is now trying to sort this out, and I think it is trying to put wraps around. But I think that societal, digital, and now the real technological evolutions and in part revolutions means that we struggle to keep up.
So I think it's interesting you brought up, the mobile device side of things, Michael, because obviously, BYOD isn't a new trend in terms, I think, so I show my age a bit, but got into the industry just after the iPhone was launched, and I kind of, as an analyst, covered the whole rise of that BYOD, MDM, EMM movement. And so to me, it feels like, oh, we've been talking about that, but it's interesting to say, yeah, that's coming back around almost because of the, the way working patterns have changed. And so it shows me people never really maybe got a hold of it in the first place. But yeah, and then to your point, Tom, in terms of society evolving, and now it's hard not to talk about AI, but something I've been thinking about or we've been looking at in terms of what the new patterns of working mean are around deepfakes and fake employees. Is this a whole new angle we're going to start seeing in terms of insider threat? So if if you never meet a colleague, and we've all had a few of these people in person that we've never actually met, I'm pretty sure everyone I've worked with was real. But for the first few days, you never met them. As deepfake technology improves, is there going to be a slightly more out there threat? But as it becomes scalable, better, do you start getting more people just able, or bad guys be able to infiltrate companies by faking real people or just by pretending to be someone?
I'm afraid to say, Richard, that you do actually owe us all £1 for saying the word AI.
Sorry, I brought it up first. Apologies.
So. And with all the listeners, as well, it's
not all the listeners £1 as well. Just
Tom, you were going to say something.
Yeah, and I was about to sort of follow on with, you just need to look at your individual digital footprint nowadays on different different platforms, and if you're doing that sort of reconnaissance and research, your ability to to really map out an organization, the core individuals, sometimes some of their especially in the digital space, their key sort of capabilities, etc., which may allow you to understand or at least make assumptions about some of the digital technologies they've got in place. That is broad, and there is just rich pickings for not even a really developed actor, frankly, to get to a really good understanding of an organization.
Yeah. Now, Richard, I know, joking aside, we mentioned about you mentioned about AI there. AI has been top of mind for a long time now. It seems to have been, a high profile. What was it, November 22 that ChatGPT 3 was announced, and it was the best thing ever. And we've effectively had 2 years running where AI is the top topic. So we can't really talk about 2025 without talking about AI, let's face it, even if it will cost us a fortune between us. But is AI going to hold that top spot in our sort of of the infosec media's attention next year again? Is there much else that it can do for us that another piece of technology or buzzword that's going to come out next year?
I'll just say from my perspective, one of the things that I've seen just over the last few months is a lot of organizations, they've stood up oversight boards that are responsible for reviewing anything that has AI in the feature list. And I feel like this is almost a dangerous path to go down, where we're almost putting out these blanket policies now that say no AI until it goes through the review board. And the review board is not typically staffed appropriately or given this as a full-time job. And so
qualified to do it.
You have a significant bottleneck, and it's a lot of fear and misunderstanding that I see happening right now. We don't need to talk about this at length, but Apple Intelligence, which launched just a couple of months ago with its on-device capabilities, I think was quite a game changer in terms of enabling consumers with quick access to AI functionality. Rewrite a couple of text messages or generate some graphics. I've seen a lot of businesses actually say, hold back on your OS updates. We're not sure we want that in the organization, which I think is a bigger problem for the business, to hold back security patches simply because of that one feature, which in many ways is quite controlled. And so I think businesses need to be thoughtful about how their blanket policies around AI are restricting them from actually improving their security posture in other areas that they need to be careful about.
It's a really interesting point, because I think, you know, there's a bit of a conundrum here as well, because I think a lot of AI adoption from a business point of view has just been a solution looking for a problem. Really, it's almost like what everyone's doing, let's jump on it. So, you know, the case for those governance boards is, I think, kind of vital. But, you know, you need to have some kind of governance and strategy in place to say, okay, why are we actually adopting this? How's it going to improve? No doubt there will be some brilliant improvements to efficiency and productivity you can make with all the different AI applications out there. But yeah, I guess there needs to be that kind of, I think it's a great point you bring up, Michael. There needs to be that balance between getting the governance and the strategy right, and actually making sure these systems are working for you and not just creating problems, or not just being done in various disparate parts of the business because someone fancies it, versus actually making sure that the patches are up to date and, you know, the systems are in place, and the innovation is still happening. You know, within of course businesses are going to jump on this. You know, anything that can improve productivity and innovation, makes sense. But
I think going back to the supply chain point, you know, AI may well be being adopted and you just don't know about it because it's in those tiers below you that you don't necessarily have the visibility or, you know, that governance and assurance over. So I think you do need to be quite sort of, you know, careful. There is definitely a sweet spot between avoidance and rapid adoption. But there are some, you know, really quite challenging issues, and I do think it will remain a topic as we're still understanding it, and it is still. I think, you know, again, it's a great sort of MDM issue where there are so many stories about, you know, the terrible things that AI can do, or the miraculous and wonderful things that it can do. And again, we've got to get some balance, and we've got to, you know, try and get the facts into that so that people can judge the risk versus the reward.
In the last few minutes, let's just cover, we've got a question from Colin Dexbury, who I've got a sneaking suspicion might be winning a mug this week. And what about AI and nation states? Although I won't pay the £1 for mentioning AI twice. Outrageous. Are we genuinely seeing or expecting the resources of a nation state to train their models to surpass anything we can defend against? What about competitors on a business level?
I think it's a great question. I would absolutely expect any attacker to embrace new technology that's going to enable them to be more efficient, to be more deadly with whatever it is that they're crafting. And I think this gets back to what we were just discussing around how businesses are embracing AI technology. We need the defenders to be doing the exact same thing. The defenders should be training their models, should be building models to attack their models, to actually improve the whole system, and to effectively simulate what we'd expect the other side to be doing. So this is an arms race, and we shouldn't be holding back the defenders from picking up the tools that are available to them, I think, as they continue to craft more effective solutions here to defend.
I totally agree. I think there's another facet to this when you look at some states, and those in particular, where their human rights records are less than perfect, and the ability to abuse AI for the monitoring and subsequent actions on parts of the population, I think is a real concern. I think that, again, it comes into sort of, you know, societal ethics. So I think, you would use anything in your arsenal, both to, you know, offensively and defensively. But also, I think there's another aspect of this in some nations which is genuinely concerning, and we, I think, as a responsible society, have to recognise that.
Well, I wouldn't disagree with any of that. I'd say but in the short term, I'm not sure there's anything that attackers are going to come up with AI that we can't defend against. Like a lot of what I think, no, don't get me wrong, in a few years' time, there could be stuff like polymorphic malware out there, you know, shape-shifting malware that's able to defeat defenses we currently have. In the short term, I think organizations, have to do that work on building up AI defenses, but that's also kind of pointless right now if you haven't got the basics right. And I think so a lot of organizations just kind of get your basic security frameworks in place and understand what it is you're defending against before you can start thinking about AI. So the risk I think we have is just running away and getting excited that AI is going to solve all our problems defensively because it's the only thing that's going to, make us pay offensively. I don't think that's true. Over the next couple of years, at least, AI will be enhancing existing attack capabilities.
Yep.
So the same methods we already have in place to protect against them, we need to make sure those are working.
Richard, we had one of your colleagues on a few weeks ago, Lee Munson. He was
Yes,
talking
yeah.
about
He knows more
talking
about
about
it than
AI
me.
specifically. He was very clear in his opinion. We're 2 to 3 years away from AI in the sort of cyber offensive space being anything to worry about outside of the fact of scale.
Yeah.
What AI can do is just allow people to do the same thing, but at a far greater scale.
Yeah. So
I mean, I think the one
we don't have to work about the future. We have to be worried about the future and start
Yeah.
preparing now, because it is going to get more capable.
I suppose the one point that I would reflect upon, where you've got a really diverse supply chain, it may not necessarily be thinking about security. It doesn't necessarily have the defenses that may become more vulnerable to different attack groups who can manipulate AI quite easily. We haven't spoken about insider risk at all, actually. And when you look at the democratization of attack tooling, and AI offers an insider quite an interesting sort of evolution path there. So I'll agree, but I think there are facets that do still slightly concern me, even if it's slightly further at reach.
It's almost like this is not a one-dimensional problem.
Yeah, and the inside, you bring up the insider threat there, Tom. I think, yeah, absolutely. Especially, everything we talked about at the beginning, the conflict, the social division going on at the moment.
Yeah.
That creates the environment for insider threats. If you think, well, where do eco activists go next? Now, well, what's one of the most polluting industries in the world? IT. So you just kind of think, we haven't seen these instances yet, but I could absolutely see it happening over the next couple of years.
Yeah.
People infiltrating organizations. So certainly, for various different motivations, you're going to see a lot more insider threats, and AI does give them a whole new tool set potentially.
So we're coming up on time. I'm going to go round the three of you. We always ask this: what's the one thing our audience can do when they get to their desks tomorrow morning as regards thinking about the threat landscape next year? What's the one thing they should be looking at? And Richard, I'm going to start with you.
I'm going to take it back to the culture side of things, and there's no easy way, but can we think about how to stop? Can we get people to stop and think just about everything? There's so much kind of anger around at the moment, and people act quickly and don't think about what they're doing. So many security incidents could be stopped if people stopped and thought about it for a minute. Is it too good to be true? So have a think about how can you drive that culture, that one simple instruction through the business.
Do you know what? I think that's advice for life, not just for cybersecurity. Let's all just stop and think.
Yeah.
No, but very true. It's very true. Tom.
As an old phrase people have heard of, that the absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence. So there is a threat. It can come from inside. It can be criminal. It can be hacktivist. It could be state. Your equities are of interest to others. So do think about that, going back, and do take that seriously. But don't think that the problem is insurmountable, and just start with the basics. If you can do the basics, you'll get a long way to, knocking off those lower level threats. So get the basics right and think that there is a real risk there.
Thank you. And finally, to our wonderful sponsor, Michael.
I'm going to bring it back to productivity and digital transformation. I think that what folks maybe can start the week doing is, looking at all the outcomes and the results of their recent initiatives, and see where they might have some uncovered security projects that they can put some focus on. I think the important thing here is to not try to boil the ocean, but like Richard and Tom have said, is get back to basics. Choose one corner of that digital transformation footprint. Choose your corporate-owned mobile devices, for example, and just figure out what kind of security hygiene process you can put in place to make sure that all those devices are kind of shored up and a little bit better equipped to face the onslaught that they're going to face in the coming year.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you all three of you. It just remains for me to close us off with just a few comments. Firstly, it will come as no surprise, and not least to Colin himself. Colin Dexbury is the winner of this week's teissTalk mug. Congratulations, well done. I'm sure your spouse will be thrilled with their brand new Christmas present that you now no longer have to buy on Christmas Eve for them. Secondly, don't forget to join us for our next teissTalk, which is in over a month's time. We've got some time off. The 23rd of January, the future of SecOps. Why should leaders be optimistic? So we look forward to that. And thirdly, thank you all to all of you. All of our listeners, all of our watchers and audience, etc. Thank you for joining us for teissTalk this year. It's been fabulous, to say the least. We've thoroughly enjoyed ourselves. We've had some excellent speakers. Even the ones today were fantastic and excellent. What can I say? We couldn't ask for more. So I trust everybody will have a wonderful and restful holiday period and Christmas, if that's what you celebrate. And finally, once again, thank you to Richard. Thank you.
Get myself off mute. Thanks a lot, Tom. It's been great to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks all.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you. Happy holidays.
And to our audience, stay secure, my friends.